Real quick before we dive in, Matt Gilhooley's book is out. Still Here, True Stories of the Moments That Changed Everything is available right now on Kindle and paperback on Amazon. Over 100 stories from guests on the Life Shift podcast, one listener trying to make sense of what all of these moments mean for the rest of us. If you've been listening to the Life Shift for a while, this book is what 4 years of conversations have been building toward. It's personal, it's honest, and it might be the thing you hand to someone who needs to feel a little less alone. Find it by searching for Still Here by Matt Gilhooley on Amazon for the paperback and ebook, or check the show notes for the links. And if you read it and it moves you, an honest review on Amazon helps more people find it. Now on to today's episode.
For Wendy, the first life shift came early. She lost her father at 7 in a time when kids were really just expected to stay quiet and keep moving. There was no language for grief, no room to have any questions, just the silence that settled into her body and followed her for decades. Years later, another truth surfaced that reframed everything she thought she knew about her family and herself. This is a story about childhood loss, buried secrets, and what it takes to finally make sense of your own story.
I was 62 years old when I found out that my father, who died when I was 7, was not my biological father. And it was an existential feeling because it's like, who am I then?
You're listening to the Life Shift podcast. I'm your host, Matt Gilhooley. This show is built around one simple idea: that sometimes a single moment can change how we see everything. Each week, I talk with someone about the moment that shifted their life and how they learned to live differently after it. These are not stories about having it all figured out. They are stories about what it looks like to keep going once the story changes. Thank you for being here. Here's today's story. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Life Shift podcast. I am here with Wendy. Hello, Wendy.
Hello. It's so great to be here with you, Matt.
Well, thank you for wanting to be a part of the Life Shift podcast. We're nearing 250 episodes now, and I don't know how to describe it any other way. It is a journey that I never could have imagined for myself. Hearing so many important stories, so many human stories, so many stories that maybe were not talked about when I was growing up, and people were afraid to share the hard pieces. I think growing up, I just assumed that we were supposed to, stay in line. All the stuff that is bad, we keep at home and we don't talk about that. And we present to be a perfectly formed human. And so I'm just so grateful, even before we have this conversation today, that you wanted to be a part of it.
I'm so happy to be here and to be in conversation with you.
We will see where it goes. And just to anyone listening now, this conversation will unfold live as we are recording it. And I think that's so important because we need conversation and community more than ever. And we need to be able to have conversations, even if they're totally different than our own experiences and we get curious about them or our assumptions are wrong. Those are the important things. I would love to start just with a question, Wendy, of going into 2026. Who is Wendy? Like, how do you show up in the world? How do you identify these days? Like, what's your vibe?
Well, I am a writer. Obviously, I just published My Pretty Baby, and I am a yogi, and I'm a sober woman and mother and a dreamer. And I'm looking to do more incredible things and to have conversations like I'm having with you today, Matt, because My Pretty Baby, I wrote it really as a call to action for us to have these kinds of conversations, to talk about, in particular, adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and for us to understand that millions of us are suffering from childhood experiences that were never healed or talked about, just as you said. And so I'm really looking forward to, I'm going to be a speaker, a public speaker. I'm going to be at different book conferences this year. And that is my mantra, is I want us to have these conversations without stigma, without shame, because I feel all you have to do is look around our society to see that we are in desperate need of healing. And I believe by having honest, open conversations about childhood, adverse childhood experiences is the way to open up the conversation.
For sure. Well, congratulations on your book and your upcoming adventures in speaking and seeing how your book is helping people around the world. I 100% agree with the honest conversations. And I think I would expand it to about anything and not necessarily just about what you're focused on. I just think that so many of us grew up in a society in which we were conditioned to talk about certain things and not talk about other things, and which then brought on shame because we felt like we had to internalize everything. And, and it's just good to be open and honest and curious with each other. Having this podcast and having these types of conversations has taught me how to listen. I don't think I ever knew how to listen properly, to actively listen to the conversation and be okay with where it went and not stick to my bullets or waiting for the next silence to say the smartest thing in the room, like the smartest question I could ask, where I don't even know what happened before or after because I was so focused on filling that space. And so I love what you're doing. I love that you're giving permission, if you will, through your book for people to do the same and to have these honest conversations. So I know for sure that your life story and your life shifts, all of them, all the pieces, all the ones that we have throughout our lives has really formed this book, obviously, right? And this new adventure that you're going on with kind of giving permission around the world.
Yes.
Is that true?
And this is true. And so who I am today is an author and a speaker, an advocate, and that's like a new chapter literally in my life. And
so a life shift.
It is a huge life shift. Actually, it took me a long time to write my book. And what I hope that readers will get from it is that even though trauma is universal, so is healing. So that's what I hope my book will reach people, that there are ways to heal, and we'll carry on having these conversations about our lives and how to have more authentic conversations, like you said, and how to be good listeners, I think is very important.
Yeah, I thought I knew how to listen until I really started listening, right? And really caring and showing. I think what another piece that I learned, which was really interesting to me, was finally being okay with asking a question that didn't get the response I expected. I think that was a really important lesson, because I think we should disagree on things. I think that's okay. But I think we want to be curious as to why we have these different beliefs or thoughts or approaches to things. And that just brings us together even more, even though we do it differently or think differently. So it's beautiful. And I love that your journey is just going to unfold even more in 2026. So why don't we get into the conversation about, leading up to your life shift? If you could, I know you have many life shifts. I know you have some really big traumatic ones, and then you have some everyday ones that a lot of us have. But maybe you could paint the picture of your life leading up to this first major life shift moment that you want to talk about today.
As far as I knew, I just had, a mother and a father, and I had two older siblings. One was 7 years older and one was 12 years older. And so I just had a very content childhood, but up until I was 7. So that's not a lot of life.
Yeah. So was it normal, like happy? Did you feel like you were doing all the normal things? And
yeah, up until I was 7, I thought, but what does a little child know? I mean, I just thought we had a happy life together. My mother was very loving, and I never saw any trauma, or I never, was subjected to anything before I was 7. I thought, that was a happy life. But then when I was 7, my father died, and I would imagine, yes, that was the first trauma, the first life shift when, as you said, and my father died in 1964. So in 1964, people really were not explaining to children about death. And no one said to me, you know, your father loved you and he's so sorry that he died and he's sorry that he won't see you grow up. No one said, you can always talk to him and the moon and the stars and we'll always remember him, and it's sad that he died, but his body was very sick, and the doctors couldn't help him. No one said anything. I was very alone in my grief and my loss.
Did you know he was sick?
Yes,
Did you have
he
a
had
good awareness of that? Okay.
Yes, he had many heart attacks leading up to when he died, and I had an inkling that he might die, but no one in my family talked about it. I was just watching my mom and my older sister going about the business of planning his funeral, and it was very shocking and traumatic to me, and I had no idea that I carried that grief until I was in my 20s. And around the time of 1989 that you were speaking of, when your mother died, I didn't even know that I had this grief until I was in an acting class in Los Angeles, and we were doing a Stanislavski sense memory class where you would describe like a childhood memory by sights and the sounds and the taste and the smell. And I was actually trying to describe one of the best memories that I had of my dad in our garden in the backyard when he went to his strawberry garden and he plucked the biggest, reddest, ripest strawberry out of the patch and wiped off the dirt and popped it into my mouth. And I thought it was going to be this incredible, happy, wonderful memory. And then we walked to this braided archway that was covered in honeysuckle, and he stopped to inhale this delectable smell. And I was describing this, but all these feelings were coming up inside of me that didn't connect with this wonderful memory that I had. And my acting teacher yells out at me, "Speak to him, Wendy, speak to him." And I didn't know how to speak to my dead father. I had never spoken to him. Nobody told me that I could. And I felt very conflicted and confused. And the feelings inside of me that were rumbling up were, it was frightening. Exactly. And eventually, and my teacher kept, Wendy, speak to him, tell him what you're thinking, what you're feeling. And I yelled out, "I'm angry at you." I had no idea that I was angry at my father. I was in my 20s in this acting class. So we're talking like, 20 years after he died. I was angry at him, of course, because he abandoned me, because he died, because my whole life changed when he died. And 2 years later, my mom brought into our family the man who would become my stepfather, who was an alcoholic and a violent man who then terrorized me my whole life. And of course, I was angry at my father because I fantasized about what would my life have been had he not died. So
is it frightening when something like that unlocks? I've had something similar happen.
Yes. And my teacher, bless his heart, came up to me and hugged me. By then I'm just sobbing. And he said, "You have to, these emotions have been buried in you for so many years. You have to be so kind and gentle to yourself for the next few days. Really just try to process it. And by the way, you might like to seek out therapy to work on this some more." And that was the beginning of when I thought, wow, I had no idea that those unprocessed feelings of grief and loss and sadness and anger were all stored in my body, just like Bessel van der Kolk says,
keeps the score.
The body keeps the score, and it was all there.
It's all there.
So
yeah, really curious though. to kind of step back a little bit, after your father died and everyone kind of just moved on with things, and here you are, this little 7-year-old trying to move through the world, do you look back on 7 to 20 and see yourself, like, did you put on masks at all? Were you someone that like pretended everything was fine and you knew it wasn't? Or did you just did you have the same mentality of the pre-7, in which everything was just as it was and that's just how it goes?
Well, no. And as you probably know, a child that loses a parent, as you did, becomes very attached to the surviving parent and wants to protect them at all costs. And you have this fear that they will too die or abandon you. So, of course, I became like a caregiver. I wanted my mom to be happy. And if her happiness depended on having my stepdad in our family, even though he was an alcoholic and threatened to kill us, then so be it. I just wanted her to be happy. I wanted her not to leave me and not abandon me. And I was terrified that my mother would die right up until at 92 and a half, she died. I carried that fear my whole life. So yes, I did pretend that everything was okay. And not only that, but it was odd. As a young child, I would write school papers about explaining death to children. I wrote papers about euthanasia. I wrote papers about, that death was normal. But I
I mean,
didn't really.
yeah, but it kind of sounds like you were trying to process, whether you were actually processing, but it sounds like you were trying to figure things out without being blatant
On
about
my
it.
own. Yes.
Yeah.
On my own.
And I understand that feeling. Luckily, after my mom died, it was still a safe environment for me. So I didn't have necessarily the same experience, but I did have the fear of abandonment. It was deeply embedded because the people around me, I could tell that they wanted to just make sure I was okay. So I felt, oh crap, I have to show everyone that I'm okay and that I'm perfect so that nobody will leave. And that just turns, like yours did, turns into like this giant snowball in which you get to be 30 or 40 and you're like, oh, I'm still doing those things because they're so deeply embedded in me. I'm aware of them now. But I became a great student. I was like, I didn't get in trouble because I knew if I wasn't perfect in my brain, that my dad would leave me. And he wasn't going to. That was never going to happen. Just like your mom was always going to love you, even if he was not in the space, and she would find new happiness. So it's the things that we take on as these little kids that can't process because we don't have the tools, we don't have the environment that is safe for us to do so. So I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. Even if they didn't lose a parent, something traumatic happens as a kid and you take on all these things out of fear.
Yes. Well, and then mine was, I had a double, dose of childhood trauma. Not only did, I lose my father, but then when my stepfather came into the picture, I felt a little bit like I lost my mother because she was codependent and taking care of him and, subjected me to alcoholism and violence and threats of being killed. And so it's even more complicated because I had these older siblings that I didn't feel very loved by. And I always thought it was mostly because of the age difference, being 7 and 12 years older, and, that they had a different experience than I did. And so I spent my life trying to figure out what happened to my family. And that's really what, my writing was about, to try to figure out what happened to my family. I always put the finger on, it was easy to say, well, my dad died, and that was a big trauma. And then I had this alcoholic stepdad, and that's a big trauma. But there's something else. There's something more. There's more. And then, of course, only 6 years ago, I unraveled the big, big family secret that was the big aha of, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense. Not to give it all away, but, you know, it
Well, feel
wasn't
free if that makes
just,
sense.
well, I mean, as I was writing the book, first I was sort of like, because as you said, like, you're trying to figure out your family. Of course, a parent died, and of course that makes sense. That was a huge trauma. And then you have this alcoholic step parent. And my siblings were older. So by the time my dad died, my sister had already moved out of the house. And then my brother was older, so then he went off to college. So in some ways, I was almost like an only child with my mom and my stepdad. So I was the one that really got the brunt of my stepdad. And then, but there was an inkling, there was that voice, the same voice that, kind of encouraged me to get the heck out of Dodge. As soon as when I was 17, I turned 18, I left the Midwest and moved to California and got myself in college. And the years that I spent just sort of like comparing my family to other people's families, and why do people act this way, or, don't act that way, or,
Did
it
you
was
take on any
always,
blame at all?
oh, 100%,
Okay.
especially because, I thought it was all my fault. Like,
Which clearly wasn't, but we
well,
do it.
the first time that my stepdad became violent on Christmas Eve and had been drinking quite a bit was because we had gone to some family friend's house, and their tradition was for the kids to open their presents on Christmas Eve. So my brother and I sat there like dopes while all these children were opening up their presents, and there was nothing for us. And I was 9, I was just so excited. I couldn't wait for Santa to come. So when we got home, I asked my mom, "Oh, Mom, couldn't we just open one present? Mike and I just," and my mom was like, "Oh, I guess, and my stepdad, screamed out, "No, God damn it. It's not Christmas." And because I asked to open up a present, he tore down the Christmas tree and threatened to kill all of us. And so that was another life shift where it's all my fault. I asked if I could open a present. And then, of course, I internalized that as a kid. What is wrong with my stepdad? There were two voices. One that would say, "This is not you, kid. This is on him." But because I was so young, I didn't have the developmental maturity enough to understand that. I internalized it like, he acts like this because of me, and it is my fault. And if it weren't for me being in the picture, then maybe he wouldn't. And I felt that way all the way until I actually left home. When I said to my mom, "Okay, Mom, are you going to be okay when I leave? Is he going to actually change, when I leave?" So I internalized it, but also because of my relationship with my older siblings, who seemed to not really care for me. They were not typical siblings that I dreamt of having. They were not the kind of siblings. No one ever read to me. No one played games with me. No one did art projects with me. No one curled my hair or did my nails. There was no kind of older sibling doting. And I didn't know what that was about 100% until, as I said, about 6 years ago, as I was writing my book, another secret, I started uncovering family secrets. And I had started questioning who I looked like in the family. Eventually, through DNA, I would learn that my father, who died when I was 7, was not my father. So
Biologically.
biologically,
He was your father, right?
he was. And I always say he'll always be my daddy who died when I was 7.
Yeah. But you found
But
out, I mean,
he was,
that's a rug That's a rug being pulled, because then you really feel, did you feel, I don't want to put these emotions on you, but did you have a sense of like, oh, like my whole life doesn't make sense now because I don't know, actually, I didn't know who I was to begin with.
Yes,
It's like an unraveling.
absolutely. It was an existential.
Yeah, what does that feel like? Not to
It
sensationalize it, but I mean,
well,
just as a
just
human.
no. You feel very untethered. I absolutely had no idea. I mean, I didn't even have an inkling that
But you had an
my
inkling. You had
father.
some kind of feeling, right?
Well,
Not about
I
your father
didn't
specifically.
exactly. I
Yeah.
kind of felt other in my own family. I felt like, who are these people? And I'm not sure, was I adopted? Like I would ask crazy questions of myself. Oh, Wendy, stop
Yeah. Yeah.
thinking that. But no, I would look at myself and my sister and my mom and wonder where my nose came from. And so, yes, I had some kind of feeling that I didn't fit into my family, but I never dreamed it was because my father wasn't my father. So I was 62 years old when I found out that my father, who died when I was 7, was not my biological father. And it was an existential feeling because it's like, who am I then? If I'm not my father's child, who am I? And who are my ancestors? Even more so, I'm very into my ancestors and who my people are and a sense of belonging because I did not feel like I belonged in my own family. And so ancestors mean a lot to me. Like I have my family tree, I have my ancestry, and I always had that of my mom, but I never had it of my dad who died. And I always felt more connected to my mother. Like I didn't feel connected to my father's family. And in fact, after he died, we really didn't have that much contact with his brother and with cousins. And I always wondered that too. Like, that's weird. Why don't we have a connection to my dad's family? So
You get this
I've
one
spent,
answer, though. You get this one answer that immediately opens the door to like thousands more questions, right?
yes,
Because you're like,
yes.
well, and then I would probably do this. I don't know if you did it, but I would then start imagining, like, well, what if I grew up with my father instead
Oh,
of in my
100%.
mother's home? And like, who would I be? And what did you conquer first? Is the question that you had to settle down
Well,
with.
I had a million questions and I've come to a very peaceful place that unfortunately a lot of my questions will remain unanswered. But I immediately, after my mother and my stepdad passed away, and then I had to clean out their house and their, you know, security box at the bank. And my husband and I just scoured looking for a letter of something of my mom explaining her relationship with my bio dad. Like, I wanted to know if they, what was their relationship about? And were they in love? And did they consider breaking up both of their families to be together and to have me? Or, how did they come about the decision to not tell me and for me just to grow up in my mom's family versus my dad's family? But I did find the only surviving sibling that I have from my bio father's family. And she was a blessing to me because uh, she had no idea until I showed up in her life. But instead of her rejecting me, she embraced me like, you're part of me and you're my little sister. And so she filled in a lot about my bio father, and we sort of pieced together how long their relationship might have lasted. And he even knew about me. He came to visit me. Yeah, he came to my house while my dad, who died, was at work. I found out a lot of things. but even still, I still watch Finding Your Roots on PBS with Dr. Henry Louis Gates about ancestry. And I
Just sign
just
up.
sometimes, it's like, wow, wait a minute. Is my life or am I watching a movie? Because this is nuts. And it's still, will grab me and it's be like, wait, that didn't happen to me, right?
Do you show
But
up
it
in the
did.
world differently because you know this now?
Well, I'll tell you what, I feel more myself because I feel validated. I feel that my intuition of not belonging was validated by finding out the truth. And I want the truth. Finding out the truth to me has set me free. And there's a saying, the truth will set you free, but first it's going to piss you off.
Yeah.
And
Did it?
it's true. Yes, it pissed me off,
Were you
but
able
it
to
set
talk to
me
your mom
free.
about it or no?
No, because she had died 11 years prior.
I got it.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes it hard to get answers.
I wish I could,
right.
if I could bring her back for
Maybe
1
someday.
hour,
Yeah.
I'd
Well,
love
maybe
to. She
someday
would be
you'll meet up and have that conversation.
right. Yeah.
Does it bring, because I know you had this sense of, as a child, this sense of abandonment because your dad died at 7 when you were 7. Did it bring up a new sense of abandonment finding this out? Or did it compound that? Or did that not even cross your mind and now I'm a jerk for bringing it up?
No. Yeah. I mean, no, you're not a jerk, but, and yes, of course. I mean, now I say I have 3 dads of, you know, yeah, I try to just have compassion for my mom and my bio dad and the choices that they made.
Yeah,
And of
especially the time
course,
period.
and I do work through all of this in my book.
Yeah, of course.
I work through all of these emotions
Did
and
you
I
start your
work
book
through.
before you knew this?
Yes.
Oh,
So,
okay.
yes. And I had started my book. It was really just trying to find out what happened to my family and how I went about healing from my family and about the childhood trauma. And, but then in the middle of writing my book is when I learned about my paternity. So that was a big, well, there's the cherry on top.
Right. Well, I mean, they're in a weird way finding some, like you said, finding the truth will set you free, but it's kind of like it's the perfect answer of your search. As crappy as it feels or maybe felt to know all that and what could have been and all the things that come along with those questions. First of all, the time period, it was probably a very hard decision, but also like what the time period expected of people to do to move through the world in that time. So we kind of have to somewhat forgive or have compassion for the people making those decisions then.
And they never dreamed that there would be DNA testing.
No idea that was going to come in. And it's, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know what the right descriptor is, but you're not the only child that may feel that way and may never know the truth, right? In your generation. I think that in my generation, these things happen all the time, but for you to feel so ostracized in your own life, in that early life, I don't know how it was in between, but to find an answer that must be so fulfilling, even if it's not the answer you necessarily wanted or imagined for yourself.
Yes, it is, but it's also complicated by the fact that my sister, who was 12 years older than me, witnessed my mother and my bio father together, and she had a sense that there was something going on there when she was 12, but she kept it to herself. And when I was 25, I had gone back home to visit, and in anger, she said to me that I was Mr. So-and-so's daughter anyway. in anger. And I was like, what are you talking about? Who's Mr. So-and-so? So my sister had information that she kept from me and never said to me when I grew up, I have this childlike, feeling, and I witnessed some things, and maybe you want to talk to mom before she passes away. And my sister never did. She kept that information from me until basically, I did DNA and started. And then I literally, from the movies, had at 60, had a flashback from 40 years earlier going, wait a minute, my sister yelled out at anger in me that I was a Mr. So-and-so's. Who is Mr. So-and-so? There's so many bits of this story that you can't make this up. It's just kind of a crazy story. And it's so complicated from my sister's experience with my mother and my brother's experience with my mother, and the fact that I might have been able to know sooner than I found out. But that made me angry, that this is a fundamental truth about my identity. And every ethicist on the planet will say that I had a right to know. And I had hoped at least my mother would have left me a letter, but there was nothing really. There's a crazy story that she had given me an antique clock, a school clock that I'm looking at right now, that hung in our house. And I loved that clock, and she eventually gave it to me. And in digging through 40-year-old cassette tapes of interviewing her, I learned that my bio father gave her that clock.
And
now I have it.
And you had audio tapes of something like that?
I had audio tape recordings of interviewing my mother from like 40 years ago. And when I first got, a video camera, I've interviewed her my whole life. It's obvious that deep down inside, I had questions. And I always asked her about her childhood and her first kiss and her first date. And, I had questions, and I had on cassette tape and then on video recorder. And I went back after I learned about my bio father. I went back and reviewed some of these interviews. And during one of those interviews, I asked her, Mom, tell me again, where did you get that school? It's a Seth Thomas school clock that you wind up. And where did you get that again? And she wound up telling me about my bio father giving her. Of course, she didn't say, your bio father. She just said the family that lived across the hall, the, XXX family, gave me that clock. And it's just eerie and odd that I've loved that clock my whole life. And she eventually gave it to me. And I now know my bio father gave it to her.
Yeah. It's like all these little breadcrumbs throughout your life that if you had even the slightest of truth awareness, or like someone pointed out the breadcrumb, your whole life would have unfolded differently, which then becomes a question of, would you have wanted that? Because would you be this version of Wendy?
I know. I asked myself, no, it's fine the way that it all worked out, because I am who I am, and I'm glad that I am who I am. However, I would really have liked to have met my bio father. And certainly my mother, she was also protecting him and protecting his relationship with his wife. So I know she knows. If she had told me about this when I was, for instance, a teenager, I would have gone to find him. I would have always gone to find him. And he and his wife died just within months of each other. So there was never going to be a possibility where I could go to meet him, perhaps after his wife had passed so as not to hurt her. But my mom was protecting him, protecting her. And she just, I guess, thought, it's okay. Wendy doesn't need to know. But
Probably thought she was protecting you in the
she
same
thought
way.
she was
Yeah.
protecting me. Yes.
Yeah. You know what? Stories like this are so fascinating to me because there are so many twists and turns in so many lives. And if someone meets us at this point in our lives and we don't tell them all these twists and turns that made us this version of ourselves, they would never know.
Never.
And back to the beginning of our conversation, it's important to have these conversations because one, I'm sure that you felt this, again, putting these emotions right into you, but when you were writing this book and then uncovering this and sharing your story out loud, and the more you talk about it, does it make you feel differently by getting all of that out into the world and sharing it and putting it on paper and all those things?
100%. It was the major life shift is writing and publishing this book.
Is it
And
scary
so
when you
scary.
published? Okay.
100. Oh, absolutely. It's still scary. I mean, my book only came out in November, but more and more people, it's really striking a chord with so many people. It's because because as I wrote it, I realized this is a call to action. This isn't just my memoir. This is millions of us who have had some kind of adverse childhood experience or some kind of family dysfunction or family secrets or something. This is my call to action. And so I feel like I'm joined by anyone and everyone who has any kind of wound that they want to heal. And because of that, it drives me even more to want to, be here with you and to be on other podcasts and to go speak on panels so that we can be honest about who we are, because this is who we are. These things that happened to us shaped us and have made us who we are, and we shouldn't feel shame about that. And I want to be able to have these conversations that, like with you, we only talk about nice things. We don't talk about the bad things. And, that has shaped a whole society and a whole culture of people that are walking wounded. And, they may say, oh, no, it's fine. I'm fine. And meanwhile, they're have an addiction or anger issues or don't have a good relationships. I mean, it can come out in so many ways.
In an acting class.
Exactly. And 64%, probably more now, the last statistics that I read, 64% of adults in our country alone, have suffered some kind of adverse childhood experience. And it affects our society, and therefore it's a public health issue. And so having these conversations and, like, I don't have any shame about the fact that my father isn't my father. I didn't do it. It's like I had no control over that. But finding out the answers, finding out the secrets that have been buried was like a ton of weights lifted off of my body. I feel freer. I feel stronger. I feel more courageous. I feel lighter. And so that gives me the energy and the strength to want to help other people, to want to have conversations. I want to hear your story. I want to hear people's stories because we're human. And that's what makes us human, is telling our stories.
Well, I think there's something beautiful about acknowledging that people are carrying around shame that they don't need to be carrying around, and to hear others say out loud that they don't carry that shame, that this is how they're moving through the world now, this is how they see it. It might give those people permission in whatever way they need to let go of that shame, to share their story in a different way. I always tell people the things in my head are much scarier in my head, and when I put them down on paper or I say them out loud, I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound so bad. Like, that's okay. I can handle that. So I encourage people to, because I encourage people to share their story in whatever way feels most appropriate to them. Maybe it's just writing, maybe it's journaling, maybe it's telling a friend, maybe it's going on a podcast or writing a book, whatever it may be. I promise you things will feel so different when you get them out and you put them into words
Yes.
outside of you.
And in AA, we say you're only as sick as your secrets. You know, carrying around what you think is your secret or your shame when in fact it's, not yours to carry.
No. And now in my 40s, I approach being a human a lot differently. Growing up, no one wanted to see me cry, and so I just internalized that I wasn't allowed to cry. I was only allowed to be sad for a certain amount of weeks after my mom died, or when my grandmother was getting sick. Like there was only certain pockets. But now I'm like, I'm going to show all of it, and that's going to be okay because I am a human just like everyone else, and it's important for me to share my vulnerabilities, to share when I do something wrong, because one, I didn't feel allowed to do that growing up, but now other people will feel okay being vulnerable, sharing things, like we're not all winning Emmy Awards and Oscars and stuff. Like some of us are getting laid off and that sucks. And we're going to talk about it and normalizing that our lives are not all the peaks. A lot of times we're in the valleys, and the valleys are where I feel the most connection to humans, or talking about those and how we rise to the next hill or whatever that may be. So I think it's just so reiterating the fact that stories and sharing them are so important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's
We're
power.
We're
The power is in the story and in the sharing and in the community. And you're creating that space that is so lovely. So I really appreciate you, Matt, for creating this space.
Well, if the things in my life had not happened, I would not be doing this. So I think there's all a meaning or something that comes from really hard things. Good can come, and I accept that compliment. So thank you for that. Curious if this, Wendy, knowing all you know now about your life, maybe still a lot of unanswered questions, but if you could talk to the Wendy that went to her room after that Christmas Eve event and you could tell her something, is there anything you'd want to share with her?
Oh, I do. I share with her all the time because I've done a lot of inner child healing work, and that's just one of the many modalities that I've done over the decades to heal. And I continue to talk to her, and I do. I think even today I pulled her up on my lap and I hugged her and I said, "My pretty baby, you're going to be okay. This is not okay what is happening in your house, but you are going to eventually create the life that you deserve. And you're going to be okay. And you're a good person. And don't let anyone ever tell you differently."
Yeah, it's so important. And it is the most common response to a question that I ask everyone very similarly. It depends who I go back to, but we all kind of want to tell that younger version that we're going to be okay. And it's part of the reason that I started the life shift, because I think if the 8-year-old version of me could have heard a 40-something-year-old version of me talking about life and feelings and move, and that I've survived, that I've made it this far, I think it would have been a little different. I would have felt less like I was the only kid with a dead parent. I mean, clearly I wasn't, right? But you feel like it.
Yes. And I write about this, the experience that at the time, right before my father died, our president, JFK, was assassinated. And for the longest time, I thought Caroline Kennedy and I were the only two little girls in a club of fatherless little girls. I thought she and we were in a club together.
And had you not seen that, you would have thought you were the only one. It feels so isolating. Yet I think I logically knew I wasn't the only one, but I really felt like I was the only person. So I just appreciate what you're doing in the world, and this call to action to people to really own their story and share their story and care about the people around us and be curious about them. I think it's so important. So if there are people listening and feel the same about what you're doing and who you are, like what's the best way to get in your orbit or tell you their story or however you want them to communicate with you? What's the best way?
Sure. They can find me on my website, www.wendyb as in boy, Correa, CORREA.com. I'm also on Instagram at Wendy B. Correa. I'm on Facebook at Wendy Correa.
Perfect. And how do you feel if someone feels inspired by your story, maybe has something similar or relates to you? What if they reach out and tell you their story or want to just like share how you sharing yours made them want to tell you?
Already, there are people that have reached out to me on Facebook to say, thank you so much for writing your story. I so relate to so many things that you wrote about and your healing process. And you know how they say it takes a village. Well, I used the entire village to heal myself and will continue to for the rest of my life. Because also, as you know, Matt, I mean, losing a child before the age of 12 is the most devastating to a human being.
Losing a
And
parent or a child?
losing a parent,
Oh, okay.
losing a parent before the age of 12 is the most devastating period of time. And I don't think that pain and that loss will go away ever. So it is a continual caring for that inner child, that 7 and 8-year-old child that lost a parent, and all of the other traumas that came along with it. It's a lifelong job for me. I will continue to do all the practices that I do, sobriety and yoga and walking and nature and meditation and psychotherapy. I will continue to do all of those practices to just keep myself healed and happy.
I love that. I think it's so important. And everyone, like you said, there's so many different modalities and you got to find the ones that work for you and be willing to try them and know that not all of them are going to work for you. And you just keep going. And if you're really intentional and aware and lucky, you can move through pretty much anything. I've talked to so many people about so many hard things and somehow we get to the other side and we can look back and, reflect on those moments as to how we've grown or changed and these things. So thank you, Wendy, for going on this journey. I know you didn't know exactly where we were going to go in this conversation, but I think it landed in the most beautiful of ways. So thank you for that.
I do too. Thank you. That was wonderful.
I encourage everyone listening to reach out to Wendy, pick up a copy of her book. I'm sure you can find it on her website or wherever books are sold. So please do that.
Wherever books are sold, you can find it.
And we will put the links in the show notes so you'll be able to just click to it and order the book. And I will say thank you for listening and being a part of the Life Shift journey. It is, again, something I never could have imagined for myself, but I am so ever grateful. So thank you. And I will be back next week with a brand new episode. Thanks again, Wendy.
Thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you for listening to the Life Shift podcast. If you want to learn more, go to www.thelifeshiftpodcast.com. There you can check out all the different episodes. You can check out the blog, some of the reviews for the podcast, and the Life Shift journal. Links are there so you can purchase your own copy, whether in digital or print format. Thanks again.